Have you ever seen one of those useless fact videos and just listened to it in the background while doing something not useless? Well, this is one of them, and let's get right into it. While many attribute the first ever console war to the 90s fight between Sega and Nintendo, the 1980s had quite the battle between the Atari 2600 and the ColecoVision. Released in 1982, the ColecoVision boasted near arcade quality graphics for games like Donkey Kong, which helped it sell over 2 million units in just its first 2 years. Atari retaliated by bundling popular games like Pac-Man, though ports of other games were rushed and critically panned. This rivalry ended with the video game crash of 1983, which both companies failed to recover from until Nintendo entered the scene. Pac-Man was created by Toru Iwatani in 1980 and was inspired by a slice of pizza. While eating pizza with one slice missing, Iwatani noticed the resemblance to a mouth, sparking the idea for Pac-Man. Pac-Man's focus on eating pellets and avoiding ghosts introduced an entirely new type of gameplay that became one of the most recognizable franchises in history. Namco's Ms. Pac-Man, released in 1982, wasn't originally developed by Namco, but by a group of MIT students who created a mod for the original Pac-Man arcade machine. They called it Crazy Otto, improving gameplay and AI. Midway, Pac-Man's American distributor, bought the rights and rebranded it as Ms. Pac-Man. It became even more popular than the original, selling 125,000 arcade cabinets. By 1983, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, often dubbed the worst video game ever made, had 2.5 million unsold cartridges. Atari had overestimated the game's success and produced more copies than consoles sold. They buried millions of unsold and returned cartridges in a New Mexico landfill under layers of concrete. This wasn't fully confirmed until 2014 when a documentary crew unearthed the cartridges. Castle Wolfenstein, released in 1981, was developed by Muse Software. It was one of the earliest games to feature stealth mechanics. Players navigated a Nazi stronghold to steal secret plans with the option to avoid or deceive guards instead of fighting. This is because of a glitch in the AI that occasionally allowed players to sneak past the guards without being attacked, which players embraced as a gameplay feature. This unintentional emphasis on stealth influenced the genre's development, paving way for games like Metal Gear, which was released in 1987. Its top-down perspective and espionage elements were revolutionary for the time. Today, we recognize Castle Wolfenstein as the foundational title for stealth in video games. Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of The Legend of Zelda, released in 1986, drew inspiration for the game's design from his childhood adventures exploring the countryside near Kyoto. As a child, he would wander through forests, stumble upon caves, and discover hidden lakes. This sense of exploration became the foundation for Zelda's overworld, where players could freely roam, find secrets, and venture into dungeons. Miyamoto wanted players to feel the same joy of discovery he experienced as a child. The Legend of Zelda was groundbreaking at the time for its innovative save feature. It was the first console game to include a battery-backed RAM system, allowing players to save their progress directly to the cartridge. This was a critical development for longer, more complex games as it removed the need for passwords. The idea came from Nintendo's focus on creating an adventure game that could be played over multiple sessions. The technology used a small lithium battery that could last for years. This save system paved the way for future titles like Final Fantasy and Pokémon, revolutionizing game design for years to come. During the development of Super Mario Bros., released in 1985, Nintendo considered making Mario shoot enemies with a gun or cannon. This idea was ultimately scrapped in favor of jumping on enemies to defeat them, as developers wanted to keep a family-friendly tone. However, remnants of the original concept remain in the final game. For example, Mario's fireballs function similarly to the projectile weapons that were originally planned. Without this change, I can only imagine what Mario would be like nowadays. In Super Mario Bros., players can encounter the Minus World, which is a glitched endless water level. Accessing it involves performing a precise maneuver in World 1-2, clipping through a wall near the warp pipes. The Minus World, labeled as -1, occurs due to a programming bug that causes the game to pull invalid level data. Unlike other levels, it cannot be completed as the pipe at the end loops back to the start. The North American version of Super Mario Bros. 2, released in 1988, wasn't the real sequel to the original. Nintendo felt the Japanese sequel, Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, was too difficult for Western audiences. Instead, they reskinned another game called Doki Doki Panic, changing the characters to Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Toad. Donkey Kong, released in 1981, almost didn't exist because Nintendo initially planned to develop an arcade game based on the Popeye license. However, when licensing negotiations fell through, Shigeru Miyamoto, a relatively unknown designer at the time, was tasked with creating a game using entirely original characters. He reimagined the concept with a carpenter, a damsel in distress, and a giant gorilla that we know now as Mario, Pauline, and Donkey Kong. This drew inspiration from King Kong and Beauty and the Beast. The game introduced one of the earliest examples of a narrative in gaming and became a massive success, selling over 132,000 arcade cabinets worldwide. This saved Nintendo's struggling US arcade division and also launched the career of Miyamoto and the legacy of Mario. Tetris was created by Alexei Pajitnov, a Soviet computer scientist working at the Academy of Sciences in Moscow. The game was developed on an Electronica 60, a computer that had very limited graphical capabilities and no internal storage. Despite this, Pajitnov was able to create the game by representing the blocks with text characters, creating the now iconic falling block puzzle. Tetris was initially designed for a select few computers in the Soviet Union, but quickly spread to other systems after it was leaked to the West. The game's addictive nature caught the attention of various software developers, but due to the political climate at the time, the distribution rights were a complex mess between the Soviet government, Western companies, and Pajitnov. Eventually, the game was licensed for platforms like the Game Boy, where it became a global phenomenon. There's also a pretty decent movie out there about this called Tetris, so if you're interested, I'd recommend it. The original Mega Man was blue because the NES could display more shades of blue than any other color due to its limited color palette of 56 colors. This limitation also influenced the overall design of the game world and enemies. Mega Man, released in 1987, didn't perform well commercially when it launched, and Capcom was hesitant to approve a sequel. However, the development team, passionate about the game, worked on Mega Man 2 in their free time without additional funding from the company. When the sequel was released in 1988, it became a massive hit, creating Mega Man's place in gaming. While Nintendo's NES ruled most of the global market in the 1980s, Sega's Master System, released in 1985, found unparalleled success in Brazil. Distributed by Tectoy, a Brazilian company, the Master System outsold even the SNES during the early 90s. Tectoy kept producing Master System consoles well into the 2000s, long after they had been discontinued around the world. The arcade version of Punch-Out!, released by Nintendo in 1984, featured two vertically stacked screens to display gameplay and stats. This unique design wasn't a creative choice at first. It happened because Nintendo had a surplus of arcade monitors left over from the failure of another game, Radar Scope. Shigeru Miyamoto and Genyo Takada designed Punch-Out! To utilize these extra monitors, giving players a dual-screen setup that became part of the game's identity. The bottom screen displayed the action, while the top screen provided players stats and information. This innovation saved costs and became a memorable feature for the arcade game. Released in 1986, Metroid broke new ground by revealing that its protagonist, Samus, was a woman. Which for all nerds at the time, this twist was nuts. Most players assumed Samus was male, as her gender wasn't hinted at in the game until the very end. If players beat the game quickly enough, Samus removes her suit, revealing her identity. This was revolutionary for gaming, since strong female leads were almost never seen before. Samus has been cemented as a feminist icon within gaming since. In 1983, Dragon's Lair wowed arcade players with its amazing cartoon-quality graphics, created by ex-Disney animator Don Bluth. Unlike most pixelated games of the era, Dragon's Lair ran on Laserdisc technology, which allowed for pre-rendered, high-quality animation. Essentially, the whole game was a series of QuickTime events where players had to press the right button at the correct time to advance the story. This was the first time people felt that arcade games could tell engaging stories. The 1987 side-scrolling shooter R-Type drew heavy inspiration from the artwork of H.R. Giger, who is best known for designing the Xenomorph in the Alien film series. The game's enemy designs are just like Giger's eerie, surreal style. This unique aesthetic, combined with its fun and challenging gameplay, made this game stand out among other shooters of the era. Sega's Outrun, released in 1986, was a groundbreaking racing game, and it allowed players to choose their own in-game music before starting a race. This feature was unprecedented at the time. The game's developer, Yu Suzuki, wanted players to feel as though they were embarking on a road trip, and the ability to select between music tracks enhanced this experience. This customization helped Outrun become one of the most beloved arcade racers of all time. The Konami code, which is up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, was first introduced in the 1986 NES game Gradius. It was developed as a cheat code to assist playtesters during development, as it granted players with a full set of power-ups. The creator of the game, Hashimoto, found the game too difficult during testing and implemented the code to make it easier for himself. Intended to be removed before release, the code was accidentally left in the final version. Its discovery by players led to its inclusion in many subsequent Konami games, offering various in-game benefits. Now, as we know, this code has widespread recognition in gaming culture, and it's all because of a simple accident. The Power Glove for NES, which was released in 1989, was an early attempt to bring motion controls to gaming. Though despite its innovation, it failed due to poor functionality and limited game support. It had only 2 dedicated games, which were Super Glove Ball and Bad Street Brawler. The device was not developed by Nintendo, but by Abrams Gentile Entertainment and designed by Thomas Zimmerman. It was based on the Advanced Data Glove, which was a virtual reality device used in scientific and industrial applications that cost around $9,000. To make it affordable for literally anyone out there, the design was way simplified for mass production and was priced at $75. You might know the Power Glove from the 1989 movie called The Wizard, where it appeared prominently. Even with a sick movie tie-in, it was a commercial failure, selling only about 100,000 units. Though, on a positive note, without the Power Glove, we may not have seen motion controls like what we see with the Wii.
Jeez. I love the Power Glove. It's so bad.
The original Final Fantasy, released in 1987, was created during an impending financial collapse for its developer Square, better known today as Square Enix. According to Hironobu Sakaguchi, the game's director, he intended to leave the industry and return to university if it failed, so it was his personal, final project, which makes the title quite ironic. Square poured its limited resources into the development of Final Fantasy, which was inspired by the success of Dragon Quest. The gamble paid off when the game became a commercial hit in Japan, selling over 500,000 copies on the Famicom and saving Square from bankruptcy. So, gambling pays off, kids. The NES game Duck Hunt, released in 1984, is widely remembered as a single-player experience where the player uses the NES Zapper to shoot ducks. However, it secretly features a 2-player mode where the second player can control the duck's flight path using the D-pad on a second NES controller. This feature wasn't mentioned in the game's manual, leaving it unknown to many players at the time. The 80s arcade scene had one massive conspiracy theory, that being Polybius. According to the conspiracy, this game appeared in Portland, Oregon arcades in 1981 and was said to induce strange side effects such as amnesia, hallucinations, and seizures. Reports claimed government agents collected data from players, fueling conspiracy theories that it was a psychological experiment. No physical evidence of a Polybius cabinet has ever been found, and its story is most likely a hoax. Robotron 2084, released in 1982, developed by Eugene Jarvis, had a unique dual-stick control scheme. One joystick controlled movement, while the other controlled the direction of fire, creating a fast-paced and chaotic gameplay experience. While a few twin-stick shooters had existed before this one, none of them were as fun or influential. Ports to home consoles for the game were kinda awkward though, since no home system had 2 sticks. But as an arcade game, it is remembered as one of the greats. Excitebike, released in 1984, introduced a track editor that allowed players to design and race on their custom courses. The level editor was very simple. You were able to choose where to place jumps and level hazards. You were unable to save your tracks, since they hadn't figured out how to save stuff yet, so players could manually recreate their designs using the game's input codes. Sweet Home, released by Capcom in 1989 for the Famicom, is the pioneer title for the survival horror genre in video games. Developed alongside the horror film of the same name, the game follows 5 filmmakers exploring a haunted mansion in search of valuable art hidden around a giant mansion. Players navigate the mansion's intricate layout, confront supernatural enemies, and manage limited resources, all while solving complex puzzles. This kinda sounds like another Capcom game I know. Jokes aside, the game's mechanics served as a direct inspiration for Capcom's later horror game, Resident Evil, released in 1996. SimCity was created by Will Wright and released in 1989. It was inspired by city planning software, but it was designed to be more of a game than a professional tool. Wright was fascinated by the complexity of city management and wanted to create a simulation that was both engaging and educational. The game lacked direct goals, but made players keep up with citizens' happiness and manage city resources. Its open-ended nature and the lack of linear progression were revolutionary and influenced the entire simulation genre. Castlevania, released in 1986, was influenced by classic horror films. The developers drew inspiration from gothic and monster movie staples like Dracula and Frankenstein, giving the game a dark, atmospheric vibe that set it apart from other platformers of the time. The protagonist, Simon Belmont, was designed as a vampire hunter, wielding a whip to fight off supernatural threats. This game is what helped create the genre Metroidvania. I mean, it's half the title. It doesn't get more obvious than that. Those are all the 80s facts I have here today, and I hope you enjoyed them and maybe you learned something. Also, I apologize for all the names I mispronounced, but I tried my best. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace. The developers drew inspiration from gothic and monster movie staples like Dracula. The developers drew inspiration from gothic and monster movie staples.